Welcome to episode 2 of the P1 P2 Travel Hackers podcast. We are back with another episode that is filled with great travel hacking tips and exciting stories. So we're going to jump in first with our brand new segment that is absolutely not a ripoff of Capital One. This is What's in Our Wallet, and we're going to talk about the cards that we've been picking up lately. So, Seth, tell us what's in your wallet today. What are you working on?
So my latest hustle, latest churn, I'm on the Chase Inc. Preferred. So it's 120,000 miles with $8,000 to spend. Not too hard to reach that, and you can keep doing it every 90 days. It doesn't count towards your 5 and 24 limit with Chase. So I just got approved for that again. And I might kind of just keep that
going. You got
going.
approved for it again? You've already gotten this card in the past, and you now have
I'm
it
on my third
time?
one.
Sorry, I have this card, and I did not know that. You're on your third time getting this card.
Yeah, the
and
business, the Chase Inc. business cards are truly churnable. This is true churning. Like when people talk about churning, like the original churn is you're churning it every 90 days.
Time limit here? In 90 days. So you're saying you can get the bonus, you've hit your 8,000 spend, you bank your 120,000 points, and then 90 days later, you're back at it again.
The business cards on Chase, it's a rinse and repeat. You can keep doing it.
Wow. Okay. All right. So this is round 3. And what do you recall what your sign-up bonuses were around this one?
This one, I think it was 80 before.
Okay.
And then I switched to an AA card I just churned out for 80,000 AA points, which is going to be fantastic. That's going to get me business class anywhere in the world on Qantas or Qatar or AA. They have like really fair redemptions, or JAL. I'm probably going to use it for JAL, Japan Airlines, because I really want to fly with them. And I haven't, so I usually don't have AA.
So I agree, by the way. American Airlines points, just some of those valuable ones you can have. They have fantastic redemptions. But talk to us about this 120,000 points that you're going to get for Chase Ultimate Rewards. This is now the third time you've done this. This must be an all-time high for the...
Yeah, 120 is probably an all-time high. I don't think it gets much above 120. I don't think I've seen over 150 on like any card. Amex was doing that for a bit, and then Chase Reserve for a bit.
Some of the Amex Platinum and Business Platinum offers have been getting above 200. But let's talk about 120,000 Ultimate Rewards points. You could do a lot with that. These are incredibly valuable for a number of reasons. Hyatt as a transfer partner, United as a transfer partner. So this is huge. I mean, that's got to be worth what, $1,800 if you're just going straight on a 1.5 cent per.
Yeah, probably. I'd say probably about 1,800.
And most of my knowledge is if you just redeemed it.
Yeah. I've never redeemed out for cash. I know that's a common thing people do.
Well, you can get 1.5 cents out if you're just redeeming for cash, but if you're transferring these points to, let's say, Hyatt, you can get a ton of value here. And this is now the third time you're doing it. How? And you just got to you got it already. It's in the mail.
I got it already. So usually they don't approve you right away, so it seems like you got rejected. But then the card usually shows up 5 days later. That's a really common thing with the business cards. Every time I've ever signed up for a business card, they usually review it. And then usually you kind of just get the card and don't even get that like approval email.
Sorry. It sounds like you're just like waiting for something to show up in the mail. There's no indication. I'm truly questioning Chase's business model here, that they're just giving away these cards apparently to you for the third time.
Yeah.
Clearly.
I'm a baby when it comes to this. There's people that are like racking up millions of points on this probably for like the last 5 years. I'm just getting into the business card churn now.
And can you tell us about, and I think this is probably one of the most useful things for the listeners who are not in on this yet. Tell us about applying for business cards, because this is probably like, this is like the next level in this video game where you've reached the business card level. How do you apply as a business? Let's say, for example, I know obviously you are the founder of a business, but are you applying under the AvoSquado EIN? Are you using your own social as an EIN? Tell us about that.
It depends. So when I first was doing these, I didn't have a business, but that's fine. You can be a sole proprietor. You just apply with your name and your social. You'll get approved. But now I use my business's name, which is an LLC, but I follow the same strategy, and you just use your EIN for your business, and you can just use your income as business income, and there's some guides on how you should fill that out, and it's pretty liberal, which is nice about the United States in general. The reality is, like, a lot of people hear business card and think they can't apply, but that's not true.
And just to clarify, when you said you can use your income as, because they asked for the revenue for the business, and you're spot on that you can use your social security in place of the employer identifier number or EIN.
Yep.
But you do have to put business revenues.
You just kind of have to believe in yourself and your future revenue.
Seth, I believe in you, but particularly after hearing this exploit, my strategy is similar. I actually use consulting income, for example. I've done for the little consulting gigs or reselling, which is totally valid business. If you get into the reselling game, there's plenty of ways to do that. That can be completely valid income. And so you're about to get this nice sign up bonus for only $8,000 in spend, which is probably pretty reasonable over 3 months, 6 months?
Over 3 months.
Over 3 months.
So even just like if you're living a higher cost of living lifestyle, you'll probably hit that. If you're not, go book a trip with your friends and like put the Airbnb on your credit card. That's an easy one.
Just go to Whistler and get 2 day passes, and you've probably exceeded that amount right there.
Yeah, or if you want to go buy like a new bed, or like there's like a million things to spend your money on. You're probably going to hit it anyways.
$8,000 bed. This has got to be a pretty nice bed, Seth. I'm liking this bed.
Well, not just the bed. I'll usually spend like $1,000-ish or something. But so ski season's coming up.
Reasonable.
You probably don't need too many excuses of things to buy, but if you are really trying to like hit that limit and maybe you don't spend a lot, if you go on a trip with your friends, someone needs to put the Airbnb down. That's a super easy way to maximize points. I'm a big organizer of trips for my friends, and that's one of the perks.
I think it's fantastic.
It's kind of like a tip you get for planning. Well, you get the points.
And it's only merited because you are facilitating this trip with the app you're building. It's only right that you be planning and therefore get this nice perk of a little bit of added, not even manufactured spend, real spend. Okay, so you've got these 120,000 points coming your way. What are you going to do with them? Where are you going with these points?
I'll probably try to get a business class flight over to Europe for winter for this ski trip. I've been pretty light on the travel. I was thinking of going to the Balkans, like for a quick hit this fall. I do have a flight to Buenos Aires coming up in November, so I may use it for that. But honestly, the cash economy price, I saw a flight for like $350 from LAX on Delta, like 15-hour total duration, one connection in Houston. I like business class, but if it's really cheap for economy like that, and it's like Delta, like their business product's not special, like I'll just save it for flying on like Singapore or something.
It is kind of crazy how affordable it is to get pretty far these days. I feel the same way sometimes. I see a great cash fare and it's like, well, I could use points, but this is really affordable. I mean, you kind of go anywhere if you're willing to sleep upright for a night on a red eye. Okay, that sounds like a fantastic card to get. I'm kind of feeling like I want to get a second one because I have this one as well, and it's a great card to have. We recently just got our first foray into the Air Canada world, which I know you know much better than me, but we got the Chase Aeroplan card. And we got this in June when they were running a promotion for a transfer bonus. And transfer bonuses are all over the place and really can be really valuable. In this case, this was a 30% transfer bonus to Aeroplan. And I've been seeing so many fantastic redemptions on Aeroplan. They've got really great, like 85K direct from Houston to Taipei, fantastic flights, a lot of good redemptions. And so we decided to go for this. And the trick here is that anybody can get this 20% transfer bonus with their ultimate rewards. But if you have this specific card, you get an extra 10%. That was the thing that kind of put me over. I said, okay, that's actually kind of valuable. Well, if we're going to be putting, a couple 100,000 points in that program, which we decided to do, this could be really valuable. And then on top of that, I think it was another 70K points just to hit the $3,000 or $4,000 to spend over 3 months. But there was a snag. Seth, do you know what ended up happening to our points?
What happened?
They went into the ether. They disappeared. I'm not going to lie. This one still is a head scratcher. So you know how they ask you when you're signing up for a co-branded card, they say, put in your airline membership number, and then we'll just pile those points in that program, which is what we did. So we used Leah's Air Canada Aeroplan number, and we just didn't see the points get there. They never really showed up. And then we hit the sign-up bonus, and so kind of was expecting all those points to show up on our account, and they did not. They went nowhere. Do you know what do you think happened to these points?
That's pretty crazy. I'd be a little worried, but I had an issue with United where I tried to transfer like 120,000 points so I could fly like first on Lufthansa to Greece. Anyways, the points didn't show up for like 3 days because I think the amount was big enough or they like reviewed it. So that kind of screwed me. Could have been some sort of security hold. Otherwise, I don't know.
It just turns out they just generated a brand new Air Canada number for her. So she now has 2 Air Canada accounts, one that we cannot access and we don't have a password to, and the other one that we had created so that we could get the points there. So her points are now sitting in these 2 different accounts. And one would think that this is a simple problem to solve. It is not. Turns out this is a very complicated problem to solve that involves filling out forms and waiting months. I mean, months, because we called Air Canada and it just turns out that they have a team that merges accounts. This is a thing that humans need to do for some strange reason. And they are backlogged. And the representative on the phone explained to us that they're still working on requests to merge accounts from months ago. So we're just waiting for those points to show up in Lee's account. I'm dumbfounded. Is this how things are run in Canada?
Yeah, pretty much.
No.
Air Canada is like a monopolist, so they used to be the only airline in Canada, and they were owned by the government, but they were deregulated in the 80s. There used to be like Canadian Airlines and Air Canada, but they merged in like the 90s.
So they can just do whatever they want. Is that essentially it?
Yeah. I mean, they're a former government carrier and now private, but they're the biggest. So even with other competitors that appear like WestJet, which used to be this really nice offshoot of Southwest, that was really good and better than Air Canada for a while. Air Canada sort of rebranded itself. I think a lot of like the curmudgeons retired from like the government days. And so like now it's got new life, new flight attendants and other staff that are more happy to be there and energetic. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of like old machinery in place back from the days of like, well, we're your only option to get there, so deal with it.
Yeah, I think they put all the curmudgeons you're talking about, they put them in a back office, and they said, your job is to process duplicate account merge requests.
Yeah.
I picture somebody in a basement with a stack of papers in front of them, and they're pulling the papers off one by one and like looking it over with a magnifying glass, and that's what's happening here. So we have no idea when the points are going to show up, but once we get them, we think they'll be valuable, and we're hoping to use them for a trip next fall to Taipei. That's the plan.
Yeah, if you have elite status, you could try to see if that might speed it up for you.
It's supposed to come with the card, and yet again, I think the elite status was given to the duplicate account, so nothing has gone right with this. But that's okay. I'm still feeling pretty positive about it. And by the way, one other pro tip here is you talked about that $8,000 sign-up bonus that you had to hit, the minimum spend on. One thing that I've been really enjoying is there are small credit unions throughout the country in the U.S. that will let you fund a bank account with a credit card with no fees. And there's one that I found, which is fantastic, that lets you sign up for 5% APY CDs, sometimes up to 6+%, and you can fund up to $2,000 with a credit card. And then you just wait. Those $2,000 sit there in a 5% interest earning account, and then at the end of the year, you get them back if it's a 12-month CD. And it's a great way to meet these sign-up bonuses and, hey, make a little bit of interest on top of your cash. So this has been a successful strategy we use for this card, and we can share out some links in the show notes. Okay, We're going to roll on to the next segment of our podcast today. This is in preparation of having our first guest of the podcast on later in the show, Melanie Platt, who is the founder of Pitch Hackerz and knows all about this decision that founders are faced with. And so this is the start of our decision points segment, where we're going to talk about today the decision that founders and founding teams need to make between bootstrapping and fundraising. And I think we have between the two of us a bit of shared experience and accumulated knowledge here. Talk to me a little bit about your journey, Seth. You are a solo founder, or you started out that way, and you have been bootstrapping thus far to build out the AvoSquado app and company. But you might be at a decision point, so to speak, where you are considering going the other route, and that's how you got to know Melanie. So talk to us a little bit about that and what that decision has been like for you.
Sure. Yeah, I've been doing a good amount of bootstrapping to start, and there's pros and cons, obviously. The nice thing about bootstrapping is like ultimately you're in control. You can kind of do things your own pace, and you don't have the additional mental overhead of like, okay, I have to deal with investors or people that have given me money. So like I've more or less bootstrapped pretty much the whole thing, but there's some disadvantages. Like for instance, having more capital available would potentially let you grow quicker.
And you're using some of your, presumably some of your own capital. I know there's been points where you've had to lay out some cash to pay for a little thing. I mean, just it's natural. There's hosting costs, there's things like that. Talk about like what is that? Has it been a lot for you? Has it been reasonable? Is this a kind of expected cost of being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think it's pretty manageable. So I do pay some people as well to do work for me, and most of it I can typically just sustain it as out of my operating expenses of my pay, because I'm working full time, and I can just basically, instead of investing some of that money just into Triple Q or some stock ETF, I could just invest it in myself.
I love that, thinking about it as you're investing in yourself. Like it's not an expense, it's an investment.
Is it going to be higher risk than ETF? Yeah. Is the upside going to be higher? Definitely.
And you maintain 100% equity and control of your company all along.
Yeah.
That's huge. And so talk about a little bit about what does the future look like? And this is, again, a segue to having Mel on and her business, Pitch Hackerz. But what are you thinking about next for AvoSquado?
Yeah, so I'm looking into raising a safe round. And so, part of that, I wanted to get a deck created. And, I could have made it myself, but Mel made a deck for some of my friends who they have a startup that does augmented reality ads. They were able to raise like a good amount of money based on her deck. So it just seemed to make sense to me. I've never made a pitch deck. There's a lot of great templates and information online, but being a solo founder, I don't have a lot of time. So I think that was a good decision. And then I can use that if I'm pitching friends and family or other people, but I haven't really started doing fundraising, but I'm thinking of trying to raise maybe like a few $100,000 through like friends and family and angels. I have some calls with some other people I've worked with in the industry. So thinking about that, but I don't have time to go full on that. And to do a really good job, the general advice is you want to go full time on just like fundraising for a couple of months. Try like go all in, try to raise a bunch of money during this period of time and then close it out. But
talk to us a bit about timing. So you've been doing this now for how long total from the beginning?
I think we're over a year now. Yeah, I started hacking on this last year. I think when I first did the first designs in Figma, it was on my sabbatical at work. We got 6 weeks sabbatical every 4 years. And so I was jamming on this idea. I was in Florianopolis, Brazil, and I was playing around in Figma, which I had never used. And so I was doing all the designs and the screens, and I was having a lot of fun. And then from there, I started coding. Probably started coding in April, very basics of the coding. So that was in 2023. It's been about over a year now. So we have an MVP out. We released that in New Year's 2024. So the
Okay.
app's been out since like September, working on lots of other features now as well.
Okay.
We're going to
And
release the ability for users to be able to like book activities. So book heli skiing, go book ATV tour. So if your group's going somewhere, you can go book your food tour, all these things to do. So that should be coming out, I'd say in like 2 months, maybe less. We're making pretty good progress right now, actually. But it's always that last 20% that takes forever. A lot of times, like the first 80% is pretty easy, but when you're just doing the finishing testing and touches and everything, that's when your timeline can really blow up. Like sometimes you just miss something, or there's like it's not working well on Android. We're a multi-platform app, so that's a common factor in our delays is like UI issues on Android, which is unfortunate, but that's just like kind of part of the game when you're doing React Native and multi-platform.
okay, so you've got this app out now since around New Year's. Why now, or why does fundraising make sense for you now, or what's the decision there?
Yeah, so there's a few areas where we could basically use money to more effectively grow more quickly. Say like mainly in marketing, want to do some ad buys. And that just costs money. Could also scale up hiring. Some of that could do some vendor relations and sales. I had someone working with me for a bit and they did a pretty good job, but ultimately we parted ways. But it's just something that requires time and effort. And then with more money, you can usually get more expertise. You typically get what you pay for. Raising more money would let us do stuff like targeted ad buying and get out there more. We're working on these new features, and engineering is pretty well sorted, but it depends. If we raise more money, we could hire another engineer that could speed things up. The main thing I'd say is probably just for scaling up advertising, ad buys, marketing, and a lot of other things like that. We run pretty lean. It's kind of fun, but ultimately, like when you're bootstrapping and you're solo, even if you're just bootstrapping, like you kind of have to do everything.
That's definitely the case. I know for us, we're pre-product at this phase, and so the advice we've been given is the longer you can wait, or you can push off that decision to take on funding, the more successful you'll be. And I think your point about retaining some control, it's really great at this stage to feel like we have full control over the vision. And I think this is kind of the fun part. It sounds like there's a lot that you could do by taking on that funding. What's the long-term vision for you? Like when you think about this next stage of your company's evolution, what does this mean for where you want to go?
Yeah, you know what? That's a great question. I think most people are going to say you're going to want to go for like the IPO and as big as you can. And I think I'm with that. I see a lot of upside, especially like in adventure travel. People are traveling more than ever. People want to go do things that are like a little off the beaten path. Yeah. Especially like once you get past like seeing all the sites you have to see, like the Louvre. If you're going to places that maybe don't have these big famous sites to see, but they have really rich cultures of food and maybe history. And now that you've had this sort of like gig type of economy, I think there's a lot of potentials. I think it's going to be a pretty big, competitive, lively space with a lot of money for everyone.
And so this is the vehicle to get there. This is the next step in that journey. It's cool to hear you talk through how you see this and how it could get bigger. And that's where you're at that decision point where you're thinking about how do I get from here to there? And that's what this enables you to do.
Yeah, it can be hard pitching because my best, I guess, success pitching is just when I'm talking to people that travel and I'm not trying to pitch. I'm just telling like, oh, well, like check this app out. Can solve all these problems and people are really excited about it. And it's the most authentic too. And it just seems like the easiest way to pitch because you're solving people's problems. But then how do we tie it in when we're pitching someone from a more institutional level, a venture capitalist, an investor? Now we have to start talking about stuff that's kind of boring. Like I just talked about the travel market. Like that's not as exciting as like, oh, cool. Like you don't have to use Excel anymore. And like you can see all your activities on a map. That's cool. People get it. You can pitch them in 2 minutes. People, like it doesn't take much. People will just download your app. It's easy, especially if you make it easy to sign in. But then, yeah, how do you transition to that and get people like super excited and then go into like the boring numbers part? So I've been working on my pitch and talking to people and getting, feedback like that. And it's like, yeah, how do we keep that energy up? And when we start talking about numbers.
And that's why you have someone like Mel, who we're going to hear from in just a moment. And Mel's going to give some fantastic advice to founders who are at the same juncture of making this decision, for example, for their own startups, and they don't quite know where to go, how to get there. So I'm really excited to hear from Mel. And before we get there, we just wanted to give one last sort of update on a segment that we ran from the first episode, Founder Fuel and co-founder matching sites. And Seth, I wanted to tell you about, we mentioned a few other options there, and that we originally met on YC co-founder matching, but there are startups that are trying to serve that same purpose in that niche. And one of them that I had signed up for and just doing the research, in the last month since signing up, I've gotten now, I think, 15 connection requests or messages. And I put almost nothing into my profile. And I did want to read at least one or two of the ones that have come through to give you kind of a sense for what's coming through here. The first one says, "Hello, I am a full stack software engineer. Regarding your company vision, I was very excited to be part of your amazing future. I would like to discuss more about that vacancy with you through a quick conversation. Thanks in advance." I never put a company vision on my profile, and yet people are this excited about it. I think that tells me I'm onto something.
That's a little sus.
That's how exciting my company's mission is I didn't even have to put it down. I'm going to read one more. And this one says, "Hi, my name is an external auditor. I am seeking your permission to have you stand in the gap as the next of kin and beneficiary to this 11.7 million euro fund." That one did seem really, really tempted. I was pretty tempted to send in a message to the external auditor, but I share these only to share that not all of these sites are necessarily full of the best folks out there who are genuinely looking for connections. But I just will share my experience with YC co-founder matching was completely the opposite. I really have not felt like the messages have been spammy, maybe in one or two occasions, but they truly did seem like real people trying to solve real problems and wanting to network.
Oh yeah.
Case in point, our connection here. So just we share this to say, beware. They're not all great. They're not all of the highest quality. Just buyer beware. And choose carefully in terms of platforms.
Yeah, that's interesting you said that. Because you have to go through a lot of hoops with like startup school or YC founder matching. Same thing. They really make you fill out your profile.
And look, it's just like online dating. We talked about that a little bit, how, this is sort of like this weird founder dating, and it's garbage in, garbage out. So the more you put into your profile, and I agree, I think YC co-founder matching did that in a really, really positive way, the more you're going to get out of it. So with that, we are going to move on to the first guest of our inaugural season of the P1, P2 podcast. Let's welcome to the podcast Melanie Platt. Melanie is the founder of Pitch Hackerz. Pitch Hackerz has raised $750 million for venture-backed startups or startups aspiring for venture funding. And she's here to tell us her experiences with Pitch Hackerz, and she's actually working with Seth here. So first, I'm going to start off with Mel. I want you to tell us a little bit about what inspired you to start Pitch Hackerz, and kind of how have things evolved since you started it?
Thank you. Yeah, well, thanks for having me, first of all. And it's always great when a client invites you to come back and share insights. It's good feedback, so I'm happy to be here. Pitch Hackerz was started because I saw a bunch of gaps in the way that founders and fund managers were thinking about both their businesses as a whole and how that leads into fundraising. And so when I started, I worked at a couple venture firms, accelerators, and I kept seeing the same problems come up over and over again. I help venture firms and startups raise capital, but for the sake of this conversation, I'll focus on startups. So for startups, I'd get anywhere between 1 to 30 pitch decks a day. And there were two problems. One, their materials were really shitty. They weren't able to say anything in a very clear, concise, compelling way. And if I'm going from B2B SaaS to health tech to, AI, you have to make it really, really easy for me to understand at a very fast rate to captivate my attention, because there's plenty of startups out there. So one, just overall materials. And two, they would be anywhere between 70 to 90% of looking VC scale. And VC scale is in turn startup scale. And they either wouldn't know what VCs want to see and hear, or they weren't looking at their business from the lens of what a startup scale business needs to look like. But they would have some elements, right? And so, you take a call, first call, second call with them, and generally those gaps, they have an explanation, or, maybe they just haven't thought about it from that point of view. So really just an educational standpoint of what VCs are actually looking for. I focus mainly pre-seed to Series A, and a huge portion of the work too is helping them, fine tune what their company looks like internally. So even though I help with fundraising, the first month of what I do with folks is helping them, I call it a business audit and refinement. As an example, let's say a startup can only hit 60 million by year 5. For me as a VC to return the capital back to my LPs, they're looking for these huge returns. Knowing what a VC wants to see from the lens that they also have their own investors they have to return capital to, helps you kind of navigate your business model and structure. So if you can only hit 60 million, let's pause and take a look at your go-to-market strategy, your business model, your financial modeling. Like, there's something in here that we can tweak, especially at the earliest stages. So that's kind of where it started, was just this investor readiness piece and creating pitch decks. That's why it's called Pitch Hackerz. And focused on that for mainly a year. And then people came back to me and said, "This is awesome, Mel, but I don't know how to get in front of VCs or angels. I don't have a strategy. I'm getting one call with investors every other week. Nothing's really sticking." So I came up with kind of a playbook that leverages 4 different aspects to get them in front of the right people at the right time. And I think a lot of founders struggle with the idea that they don't have this wide, massive venture capital firm network or angel network. So helping them with one, you can have the best pitch materials in the world, but if you're not actually getting in front of people, it's a whole different story. I think the passion really started was focused around a lot of the companies that I support have the knowledge and the infrastructure. They're just not looking at it from the lens of what an investor needs to see and hear, right? So they have these wonderful ideas that could potentially be startup scale if they just implement these 5 things. So helping them. Someone once called me a chief bucketing officer once, where like taking chaos that's going on inside a founder's head and making it really streamlined and easy to understand, and then translating that onto a pitch deck. So helping, kind of sift through the noise of what's going on in that founder's head to make it more captivating. And in turn, it actually helps them rethink the way they're looking at their business, right? That's part of the work that Seth and I were doing was, yes, the pitch deck was the end result, but what are the gaps that, you're not necessarily seeing or looking at, both from a venture perspective, but also just being sure that you're going to be startup scale for the long term.
Yeah, your guidance was definitely pretty useful.
Thank you.
What's your process if you're working with an early stage founder who's eager to fundraise, but you're not sure if they're investor ready or if they should be raising venture or like that whole thing?
Yeah, they need to come up with a better term than lifestyle business. Like, I feel like that's kind of undermining. You can
So
build.
insulting.
It's so insulting. It's like, okay, I've spent the last 10 years building XYZ. It's not a lifestyle. Maybe it's doing 2 million in revenue a year, right? So maybe I'll coin a new term that's not just lifestyle business. But
Please, for all of us.
if we look at the construct of what a VC needs to return back to their LPs, that's why they have a very specific type of company that they're going after, especially at the early stage, right? It's not like private equity where they're, you're more stable in the long term. I think for folks that have solid business fundamentals, one of the main questions I ask in the beginning is like, what do you want? Like, do you want this to be $1 billion company? And if you do, like, that's the end goal. If you want to go raise venture funding, you have to look at your company from that lens, which sounds ridiculous, but they have to have those types of returns, right? They're banking on 1 to 3 portfolio companies returning their entire fund, which I also have problems with that model. It's like, well, what about the other, 45? So really getting honest with yourself about what you want. Do you want to, try to have this company exit in 7 to 10 years? Or do you want this to produce decent returns, right? But pretty consistently for your investors. And there are other methods of capital. You can go, there's Kickstarter, WeFunder, different kind of crowd platforms as well, SPVs, syndicates, and then of course, angel investors. So there's other ways to get funding. And if you're looking for VC funding, you're like ready to go. You think you'll be a unicorn company, but you need to, I would say in this market, have a solid MVP deployed with some metrics to be able to get the attention of a pre-seed VC now. It's not like it was 5-10 years ago. So if you're just starting out, really leaning in towards your angel network and trying to foster those connections. But before you do that, it's really like, what do you want? And that can be a hard question to answer, especially when you think you have something that could be venture scale, but you're not sure. To be able to do that, you kind of have to go prove it out, right? Like make sure you have the right customer segmentation. Is there even a potential for product market fit? So it's a tricky question. And really, I just turn it back to them.
Now,
Where do you want to go?
This is one of the things I loved about, our first meeting, because we kind of met under the context of, hey, we're thinking about, potentially using Pitch Hackerz and building out our pitch deck. And I love that you were able to have a really honest conversation about, what are the goals and what can I do? And I think you approach it with a lot of empathy and humility. And that was really positive. What kind of mistakes do you see early stage founders making when they're approaching investors, and how do they avoid them?
Should I pick like the top 17?
At least 17. I think top 20 if we got plenty of time here.
I would say let's just focus on seed founders for now. One, the market conditions are not good. They're getting better. They're better than they were this time last year, but one, I think there's a kind of a heavy mindset on AI. What I'm seeing with founders right now is everyone's saying they're AI. But if there's not any true differentiation with the AI that you're incorporating into your product, like, okay, it's fine. So that's one that I kind of see a lot, these red flags. It's like, well, how is it just, like, how are you incorporating it? What's your moat? How are you defending it, right? And how is that going to be able to turn into $1 billion company if you have all these 5 other competitors? What's your IP? So that's kind of the most recent thing that I've been helping people navigate is you have to speak to, even though the market is looking for that, how are you truly differentiated? But I think many founders, at least in the beginning, it's really just doing your own research to see what the VCs want in a venture scale company and how does that translate to what they're looking for in pre-seed, seed right now, right? And there's so many people out in the market that I think it can be daunting where it's like, well, how much traction do they need to see in here, right? And I would say going out for a pre-seed before they're actually ready or before they truly look venture scale is one of the biggest mistakes instead of doing more of a friends and family and truly validating the product, right? That's where I see most folks kind of struggle, especially right now. 2, they're not able to clearly explain the value prop. And that's a lot of the work that I do with founders too, is it's in there, but you have to do 1 or 2 calls to really extrapolate what are the most important pieces of the product that you're building. And it when you're building something day in, day out, it can get kind of convoluted. So that's another thing. And then 3 is just like throwing spaghetti at the wall and sending out a pitch deck and hoping that people will answer your emails where if I'm a VC, I'm getting, maybe 40 emails a day of people trying to pitch me their startup. So you have to make it really captivating. And that's kind of an art in and of itself. Another segment of the work I do once we've kind of created the pitch deck and we're solid on our pitch, how do you actually get VCs to get on a call with you? And so I'll produce between 5 to 20 different types of copy, depending on who we're trying to target, and extrapolating out the most important pieces. And that takes time. So I think just making sure you're actually speaking the language of VCs and what they want to see in here, not how excited you are about your product, but what are they going to be excited about? At the end of the day, they're excited about returns.
And you mentioned, just real quick, you're saying that you have to be ready and having some metrics to back that before you go out, you're going to be more successful. I got the same advice, almost the exact same advice from a former VC. What does ready look like? What would those metrics look like for you if you were trying to pick the perfect time?
I mean, it's different if you're a blockchain startup compared to consumer tech, compared to straight consumer. Like there's a vast array of things you have to showcase for depending on what sector you're in. And it goes back to what the market conditions are. Like 10 years ago, I think a pre-seed VC would invest in something that doesn't have a product deployed yet, right? Like maybe no MVP and just an idea. And now there's too many founders out in the market. There's too many venture capital firms that need to prove out their thesis where they're looking for more than what a traditional pre-seed seed company would be showcasing. I would say one of the main things investors look for is how truly differentiated is your product. So not just like competitor analysis, but how are you looking at this problem that other people are not looking at from that lens? And then also customer type, right? So obviously it takes startups until Series B and beyond to find true product market fit. But, one VC gave me a helpful tip where it's like, you're not, from the lens of what you're doing, even if you think it's a problem that has to be solved, does the market think it's a problem that has to be solved? So really validating with the people that you're going after for this customer validation, trying to make it as less biased as possible. Like, don't go to your mom who really wants you to be able to launch the startup. Don't just go to your friends. Don't just go to one small type where you think it is the match, because there's a much wider lens of looking at it where maybe your customer type is also someone you didn't even think about, right? So that customer type is really important in the beginning. And what's that traction there? I'd say it's less on specific metrics, but is this a problem that the market thinks needs to be solved, not just you? And is this a potential truly billion-dollar company? And that can look like a myriad of different ways. And I always tell folks too, when you're pre-seed, maybe it doesn't have to be MRR or, month-over-month growth. Like, there are other ways to validate what you're doing. Maybe you have a partnership with NVIDIA. Maybe you have, these advisors that have access to a very specific market segmentation that will lead you to be able to get your first, 200,000 next month, where those are the ways and what they're kind of validating when they look at you as a founder. I think the other thing too is everyone talks about making sure that the founding team is really solid. But when you look at your founding team, how do you take your background and expertise and directly translate it into the product that you're building? So if you worked at Apple, that's awesome. But what does that mean? Like, how is that going to actually be able to take this company and scale it to be a billion-dollar company? And I see a lot of founders kind of miss out on that, where they're slapping logos on their pitch deck, which is great and validating, but how is that actually going to take this from point A to point B to point C?
It's a really good point. Saying you're ex Meta or ex Google, but how does that help you?
Yeah. And how does that, maybe you had one experience at Meta that, you had experience doing one really specific thing that took off, and maybe you did research at your grad school where you looked at something in a very specific or different way, which led you to do this and, gave you access to this very specific network. Like, there's ways to kind of massage in the value of your expertise. And then, of course, you'll get some VCs that do heavily focus on these big flashy backgrounds. But I think the true winners and where people are steering more towards is, how does your unique background make you a very good candidate to be able to take this to the end?
That's really interesting. What are some examples of where you've had to and I don't know if you've had to do this, but do you ever talk to founders where you've asked them to pivot or consider other things? Is that common?
It's not common. Short answer, yes, I have done that with people. And I think it goes back to one thing that I offer too, if a founder is looking to fundraise soon, but not yet, helping them refine their go-to-market strategy, right? Like, if they don't look venture scale or they don't look investor worthy for the raise that they're going after, what's wrong, right? And I coined myself like the McKinsey of fundraising, which is kind of dumb. I don't like McKinsey. I have to think of something different, where it's like there's something happening internally, systemically, that's not going to lead you to a raise. So what is that and how do you fix it? So I would say it's less like full pivoting. I think most founders are going to pivot 1, 2, 3, 4 times, but more so getting an outsider's perspective of, if you're not hitting these metrics, have you looked at, trying to find a different customer type? What about this? So more so the go-to-market strategy execution. And then in turn, you tend to find a better pathway forward to make you look venture scale that's gonna take your company to that next level. So I say I'm fundraising, but really it's how do you fundraise if your business fundamentals don't align with being startup scale?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Mel, can you tell us one piece of advice that you would give to new founders who are just starting out their entrepreneurial journey? So maybe they are a first-time founder, maybe they've been at a FANG company before, but this is their first time in that ball game. What would you tell them?
Buckle up.
Seriously.
Hold on to your hat. What would I tell them? There's two buckets of founders. One is you're so passionate about what you're doing that you're willing to do absolutely anything, watch it grow and scale. Two is you just kind of want to try it out. Like you have an idea, it sounds interesting, we'll see where it goes, right? And I'm sure there's stuff in between, but those are kind of the two that I see pop up. Really is, okay, I had this idea, I had this background, it could work. For that second bucket, I think it hits people really hard how difficult it is to basically be a one-man show. So as you're going to go, it goes back to that same question I ask everybody is, what do you want, right? And if you want this to be $1 billion company, you have to have that conviction in yourself because you're going to get thrown to the ground over and over again. Someone asked me, they're like, why do you like helping with fundraising? Because everyone hates it. And it's so stressful, right? But helping people realign back to their vision and their goals and helping them get clear on where they're going to see their business go, it's like that's the passion, is when people have so much conviction in what they're doing and they want to convince others, like all of that's possible. But when people just dive into this and think, I have an idea and I think it'll work, you have to have that internal conviction. So just really aligning with yourself before you go out and do that. And if you just want to try it and see if it goes, like more power to you. I love that. But just brace yourself that it's going to be ups and downs, ups and downs. And then the second piece of advice, I think it just goes back to customer fit. Like do as much research as you can, interview as many people as you can to make sure what you think is a true problem to solve is actually a problem that's worth solving. And that's where a lot of people get stuck is they think they have it, but then they figure out they don't. And like I said, every company is going to pivot 1, 2, 3 times as you're trying to figure this out. But the more you can ask them objective questions, get them engaged, really figure out if this is what they want, the better chance you have at kind of growing and scaling. And you'll learn it. You'll learn so much the more questions you ask at the earliest stages.
Yeah, we was just watching video and that was the question they asked where somebody was asking, is my idea good or bad? And they're like, well, are you talking to customers? And
yeah.
And if not, you're right. And if not, why not? Right. So it's spot on.
Yeah, I think talking to customers is really important. And it seems like it's a really commonly neglected thing. But then as you get further and further in the game, it seems like it comes out quite a bit. I'd say it's one of the most frequently asked questions. Maybe because I'm working on it more recently and there's a recency effect, but it's interesting. Like lately, it seems like I've heard talking to customers a lot in the last, I don't know, month or two.
And even customers that aren't customers yet, right? Like, how do you find your perfect customer type if you're not doing a broader reach? And that's where you really get to learn more and pivot based on, oh, I did not see it from this perspective. I think it's really useful. So spending as much time as possible and, putting out something tangible for people to grab onto is important. I see a lot of founders struggle too, where they've drained all their money producing whatever it is, software, app, into creating something that's aligned with what they think will be good. And then it turns out that they have to do a whole revamp and it's not what's actually wanted, right? So MVP is truly MVP. It's just to see if what you're doing is going to land. And then from there, you get to keep making small iterations. But the earliest stages is the hardest because you really don't know until you just keep going and trying.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like it seems like there's almost two methodologies. Like the lean startup methodology is get an MVP out and just collect all the data, let the data do the speaking. And then another methodology is doing lots of customer interviews, which is more qualitative versus quantitative. Do you have any thoughts on like which is better? Is one better?
I mean, I think it goes back to the what customers are you speaking to, right? Like if you're kind of only picking one demographic, you're probably going to get an answer that validates what you're thinking. But it doesn't really matter what you're thinking at the end of the day. It matters what the market's thinking. And that's where founders get stuck is they're so gung-ho. I think there's also just so much humility that you have to bring to the table too, and flexibility and being malleable to shifting over and over and over again, right? Like you have this long-term vision, and I think that long-term vision is going to change probably 10 times as you keep going. And it's really hard. I mean, it was hard for me when launching this company. It's like, okay, people actually want to figure out how to get in front of investors, not just that they need help making sure they're attractive to investors, right? And taking that feedback and incorporating it into something that's tangible can be really difficult. And I think it has to happen every day where it's just a constant refinement, which can it wears many people down. But yeah, I think it goes back to the MVP being, you don't want to sink all your money into it, like time and money. Just get something tangible that people can respond to. I think it's a combination of both. And then also, who are your customers? How are you finding them? Are they the real customer type? How can you broaden kind of your demographic to see if there's any outliers? And that's where I think I see a lot of companies pivot, right? Where it's like, instead of going for these large champions in healthcare, we found that chiropractors really like this one aspect of our product. And so now we're starting at this kind of SMB healthcare clinic office, or, maybe it's community, whatever it is, right? That's kind of where you get to see how your product can shift over time depending on who you're putting it in front of.
Yeah, that sounds like really good advice. And just goes back to being lean, adaptable, and humble.
Yeah, the humble thing is hard.
So if you're doing deck creation or in general just pitching, like how does it differ between like the audience of the pitch? Like we've got VCs, friends and family, angels. Like is the strategy sort of the same or for everyone and there's different tactics? I don't really know. I don't know if you have any insight on that.
I mean, I think I sound like a broken record, but it goes back to like, what do you want? So an angel is still VCs. They have a very clear, this is our thesis, this is what we're looking for, do you fit into this bucket, right? They deploy a certain amount into new companies every year. It's very structured, but you have to look a very specific way. For angels, they take their sweet time, so they don't have a mandate for when they have to deploy, right? And it can be trickier if you're looking for angels to get them in the door when there's no one in the door yet. They can kind of drag it out for a really long time, but they have much more flexibility in what they can and can't invest in. If you are a startup scale, venture scale company, you'll position that across the board. And that's why you want to make sure what it is that you're building before you even start any fundraising. What is it that you're building? And does it meet that venture scale criteria? Because if it doesn't, then you can still go after angels, right? But it's going to look a little bit different. And that kind of helps just narrow and fine tune the way you go about it. I mean, my experiences in venture and angel investing with that startup scale ideology. So I would still pull in as much as possible for how big this can go, right? The more you can make it seem, the more you can convey that these will produce really great high returns, the better. And then it does kind of bleed into, well, how de-risked is it? If you have, let's say, a publishing company that all of a sudden has created some software, does that software meet the criteria for venture scale? Like, how do you kind of blend those two together? And so I worked with a few companies where they started out as lifestyle businesses. We'll figure out a different word. And then they incorporated something into what they've been doing because they saw a gap in the market. And now it's this whole other thing. So there's a way to do it. It just depends on which route you want to go. Angels, you can also find angels that don't just invest in tech. You can find people that maybe they want to invest in 12 yoga retreats or real estate. So it's a little bit more flexible. But if your goal is to be startup scale, you want to pitch that ideology throughout to everybody.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Why limit yourself?
Yeah.
You've been doing this now for how long?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. You've probably seen a lot of good and a lot of bad. What is the most memorable pitch you've ever heard? And what made it stand out? And please feel free to share a bad one. And it could also be one you've heard of somebody else doing that you yourself didn't hear.
Yeah, the best pitch.
It could be a great one. Could be a fantastic one. And if it's one about a group travel planning app,
yeah,
that's also that's a totally valid answer.
Yeah. Absolutely crushed it. 12 out of 10 guy. You guys should invest in him, right after this podcast. Send you the email. Gosh, the best pitch. I really can't think of anything on the spot that, was just absolutely stand out. I use this one example of Suppleful in all of my conferences that I showcase. Is they make it. Suppleful is like a consumer brand company that helps you produce your own products at scale. They make it very, very dumbed down. And I think that the simpler you can make it with as little words as possible is better. And it was almost like too dumb. But they explain their value prop so easily and how big this could get in words that my grandma could understand. And that's where I think people get a little bit lost. And I love working with like software engineers, researchers, because there's so much that's going on inside their heads, and the business fundamentals are there, right? Like they have a product, it's all there, but translating that into something that's really easily digestible. I'm not sure where that company's at today. I think they raised Series B recently, but just the simplicity of these are our 3 largest problems, and it was like 7 words for each. So those are my favorite types of pitches. I mean, it's hard for me to think about it too, because when people come to me, they either have no pitch or they're like pretty shitty. So then the end result is always better. The worst pitch, I mean, I'm not going to name any names. I think where a lot of people struggle is just no one wants to see 12 different slides about your product, like the technicalities of your product. My mind can't digest it. Like, what is the key value prop of what your product does? You can use words like we're the only AI tool that does XYZ by leveraging our, proprietary IP protected algorithm that we've developed over 10 years using these 5 things. And then if they have more questions, you can kind of dive into it. But I think founders get really excited about what they're building and they just dive into the product itself in depth, and it's so overwhelming. So when people just, or paint the picture of the problem being 27 different things, right? Like tie in your problem to the solution that you provide, where, I think this is anybody's mind, right? If you're going through a pitch deck or a one-pager, if there's too many words and you're kind of jumping everywhere trying to explain something, like you have to think of it from the perspective of this person doesn't know anything, but you can't give them everything. So those are the pitches that I struggle with the most, where it's just, it's not even a pitch deck. It's just an entire paragraph of text for every slide. And then I have to kind of bucket it and take a step back and become that chief bucketing officer. I know I'll have to think about an actual pitch deck that I didn't like. And there's a Haya from TechCrunch used to do these pitch deck teardowns. He's a really great resource if you guys want to go look at him. I think he has his own like pitch guide now where he'll tear apart. It's like AI tears apart your deck for you and tells you how if you'll actually be able to fundraise based on your deck. But he tore down a lot of really, really good and really bad decks. So if you go to TechCrunch, you can find those for some good resources.
I love it. That's such a great rec. Mel, you are a fount of knowledge. It's been so great having you on the pod. You really set the bar high for our first guest of the season. It's just so great having you. And I know you're dialing in from Honolulu, which is as close to paradise as it gets. If you could travel hack your way to one place, where are you going and when?
Ooh, and when? I am a big scuba diver. That's kind of, if I could be a mermaid, I would. That would be my second career choice. I would go to Palau. I don't know. Have you guys heard of Palau?
Yeah.
Tell us all about Palau.
It's in Micronesia, and it's like the farthest you could get from anywhere. I think it's like further to get to than just Australia, and just the most pristine waters and like a hub for anything you would want to see. They have like this giant clam hub. They have 100 different types of colored coral and a place to go see sharks, but it's kind of this archipelago, just these little buckets of rock formations, and it's beautiful. I love Hawaii, but the scuba diving here is not very good just because it's so impacted by every person that comes here with their sunscreen and whatever, demolishing it with boats. So I think going there is next on the list for sure. I don't know when, but maybe you could give me some travel hacking tips on how to rack up my credit card.
We can definitely do that.
Okay, good.
We are here for that any day. We would love to have you back, Mel.
I have a scuba question before you go. I love scuba. What do you like? Like the micro life, the little stuff, or the big stuff? I'm selfishly just curious what Palau's got to offer that you want. Yeah.
My favorite part about scuba diving is panicking right before I get in the water. That's how it always goes.
Got it.
And then once that passes, I would say it's really just being one. I have kind of like a hippie side to me too, of just, I feel so at home in the ocean. So just being beneath everything in this external world that feels so safe, even though you're like 90 feet below the surface, always feels so good. Even if I don't really see anything, it's just this place of coming home. So that's why I love living in Hawaii, is I get to swim with the fish every day. Yeah, I would recommend it.
I think that also explains why you're clearly at home under pressure pitching to VCs. It's literally you spend your time under pressure. Mel, thank you again. It's been great having you. And thanks to all our listeners for joining us on episode 2 of the P1, P2 Travel Hackers podcast.
Thank you.